I'm Kurt Mondiste for RGG-EDU, and now we are going to work on an image from Blood and Sand Restaurant. So here I have our image in Capture One, and it has a crop on it. Again, I'm going to remove this crop. We can always crop it again later. If I wanted to look at, in Capture One, what kind of exposure range I have, I could adjust the exposure slider. But generally speaking, I want to leave this alone unless I need to correct for something. Any kind of style adjustments I want to do in Photoshop proper. So I have our image, and generally it looks good. The color looks nice. It's balanced. So I'm going to go ahead and process this out and work on it in Photoshop. Hit Command D to process this, and it'll open automatically in Photoshop. So I'm looking at my image here in Photoshop, and there's just a few things that we need to do here. Rob has mentioned that he just wants some basic cleaning up and boosting of the greens on the plate. So that's what I'm going to dive into. I have my cleanup layer here ready for me to do some cloning, and I have the set to current and below and the low opacity on my clone stamp. And I'm gonna just tool out anything that kind of catches my eye and seems out of place. Any areas of the image where there's some dust or a little schmutz on the plate, I'm just gonna get rid of any of that to generally perfect my image. And if I clone too much, I can just hit the E key to get back to the eraser. That's the benefit of using a blank layer to do my cloning on instead of a duplicate of the background layer, because I'm just adding the pixels that I'm covering up with, just my cloning pixels. I didn't duplicate all of the pixels just to change a few of them. And since I'm just adding a few pixels here and there, wherever I'm doing some cloning, it's very easy just to erase them if I don't like the clone work that I did, which of course happens. So inside of these little rolls of vegetables, want to clean up anything that confuses the shape of them. May come back in here and dodge some of these shapes out just a little bit to make sure that we see clearly how they're rolled up. There's this little white end to the leaf here. I'm going to go ahead and clean that up a fair amount. So moving around the image as I'm doing my cloning, don't want to take your eye off the area that you're working on. It's nice to know the keyboard shortcut to get the hand tool is the space bar. So when I hold down the space bar, my cursor changes to the hand, and that just allows me to recompose which part of the image I'm looking at. And as soon as I let up off the space bar, I have my previous tool back. In this case, that's the clone stamp. I'm holding down the space bar, recomposing, just making sure I explore the full image, removing all the little imperfections. Okay, so I've completed my cleanup work. I might find some more to do later on. And Rob's other note was about boosting the greens on the plate. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at that. I might first look at doing, just adding a little saturation is a good place to start. They are green, you just need to punch them up a little bit. So look at adding just a bit of saturation. I don't like this overall. I really just want to isolate this to the leaves. So I'm going to hit Command I to flip that mask to black. And with my paintbrush, paint white to reveal that added saturation over the leaves themselves. We may come back and revisit this once we've done a few other adjustments. It may be that this leaf that we see the underside of it, we need to add in a little bit more green rather than just ramping up the green that's there. But this is a good first move, just to add a little pop of green to those leaves. We'll look at adding just a little contrast overall. Do that with our curves adjustment. And generally, I think this image has a really nice feel to it. So I don't want to go too strong with the contrast, and I certainly don't want to blow out any highlights. So with the contrast that I like, if any highlights really get blown out, if any of the highlights really blow out, I'll just go back in and mask them off a little bit to bring that adjustment down. And just here on the edge of the plate, it seems like it's starting to blow out some, so I'm just going to mask off this curves adjustment just a little bit from the edge of that plate. And I think also up here in the highlight coming through the glass. I think this image might look nice with a slight vignette added, so I'm going to work on that now. Now, vignetting is something that I could do in Capture One, and Capture One does a nice job of adding a vignette. My preference is to just do it with a curves adjustment. In most cases, this will give us what we need and allows me to kind of paint it in exactly to where I want it to be. So I'm coming up into my highlights and pulling a point down that's darkening. And I may also grab this top point, which is my highlight point, and bring that down just a little bit as well. So that's taking anything that was white and it's making it just not quite white, adding a little gray into it. And I see this effect is darkening. Again, I'm going to flip my mask to black, and this time I'm going to get a nice big paintbrush, 20% opacity, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit just so I have some room to get around this image. And I'm going to paint white to reveal this vignette. It's happening kind of slow. I want to speed it up, so I raise my brush opacity. And I can turn that layer on and off just to see the subtle effect that it has. Just adding that little bit of vignette helps pull my eye into the center of this image. And now the thing that's catching my eye is just the underside of the plate right here. There's a little sliver of white, and my eye enters the image, and I have to jump over this little shape to get to the food. And I think if I tone that down a little bit, I'll just go straight to the food. I'm going to do that with we'll look at doing it with a clone stamp first. I could clone from a darker gray part of my plate and clone over that just a little bit. I'm going to turn off my shape dynamics here. And that is part of Photoshop that works with the Wacom tablet. And by default, it was on, and it changes the size of my brush based on how hard I'm pressing. Sometimes that's useful, and other times it gets in the way. And now I've kind of over-cloned, so I'm going to use my eraser tool to take away any extra bits of that cloning that I don't really like. I can also use my smudge tool just to kind of refine that edge of what I clone, just to smooth it out a little bit, just to it's kind of a tight little shape here that I'm cloning into. And so once I got the piece of cloning that's darkening that highlight down a little bit, now it's just about refining it so that it transitions a little more smoothly. Simplifies that and takes a little bit of the emphasis off. The same place I could look at toning down the reflection of the plate in that same area. Something about this area is really catching my eye. So I'm going to try one thing and then the other thing until I'm happy about it. So the combination there of removing the reflection and toning down that little corner of the base of the plate, I think is making it look nice and not, my mind isn't focused on that. I jump over that and get into the food a little bit quicker. So now revisiting my leaf color, we added a little saturation to these leaves, but the underside of this leaf is just not as green. And so I want to add in a little green here. The way I prefer to do that is with the color blending mode. I'm going to add a blank layer. And I'm going to set the color, the blending mode to color. So this will make this layer only blend based on the color. It doesn't do any of the detail. I can't add in any lightening or darkening. It's only going to add in the color. I'm going to name this layer color so that I really easily remember that this layer is set to the color blending mode. And I'm going to sample a good green color from this leaf over here. And I'm going to just paint that in on this leaf just to ramp up that green color a little bit. And if it's a little too much, that's okay, because I will refine that. I overpaint it a little bit, so I'm going to just erase that off. I zoomed in here a little bit. I can see what I'm doing a little easier. And a little green. So now that I have that painted in, I can revisit, is that too much green, by refining my layer opacity. So just by taking this down a little bit, I'm making this, the green that I've added, just a little bit more subtle, which I think is nice. So holding down my Option key and clicking on the visibility of my background layer, I can see before and after. I have just a little bit more contrast overall. I've added a slight vignette. And maybe as a finishing touch, I'm just going to brighten up in this area here. I'll do that with another curves adjustment. And I'm adding a point to the highlights to brighten that up. And see, once I have the points, I can fine adjust them with the arrows on my keyboard. And turning that off and on, be sure I like what it's doing. I'm really looking in the area I'm intending to control. And now Command I to flip that mask to black and paint white to reveal, to paint on that adjustment just in the area I intended it to be. Now there's this nice little drizzle of sauce on the plate. I love sauce on food, so I'm going to be sure that that shimmers nicely. I'm just going to ramp up the highlights in that a little bit. Just brightening that up will allow more punch of color to come into there. Real specifically along that. It's nice when masking on some of these adjustments, when you have a low brush opacity, it allows you to paint outside of the lines a little bit, because if you do paint outside the lines, you're only painting on 20%. And you build up that effect by painting multiple times. So most of your brush strokes wind up inside the area that you're intending to control. But of course, anything that paints outside of the lines and looks bad, then flip to mask and flip to black and mask it off. Looking again at my before and after, I'm happy with this adjustment. I think the colors on the leaves look nice. My eye really goes to the food on the plate and not the table and the surface. The vignette helps keep that, and removing some of these distracting obstacles So I'm going to save this image and move on to our next picture.